padayon sa panglakaton. Uy, ining mga buhat nga dalalon sa imo paminsan. Nga dalalon, dali na kay maimo ta sang bag-o nga kalibutan. Ako namigo ug ang hari sa duta ray ng kalibayan. Ako nga abiyan magiliuso sa kausa sang kahilwayan. Peace be with you, man. Right. Come on. Yeah, pa 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 pa. Yeah. All right. Feeling the blue. Yeah. Abyan ko sa ining tinion. Ipabutyag sa katawhan ang imong anak. Sining sugilanon para mga paghidait yara sa imo kag yara man sa amon. Ah 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 eh ah 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 oh yeah oh ah 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 ah
O labing makagagahom nga amay namon sa langit, mahinuklugon nga laon nga tagtugas ang langit, hangin, kalayo, tubig kag duta. Tanda ining imong timawa, kabay ining pag-ampo, magadulot sa amon sang kabuhi nga himaya. Salamat sa mga bugay nga imo ginpaambit sa amon. Salamat sa kabuhi nga ginadulot mo sa amon nga himpit. Salamat sa maayo nga panahon kag ilabi na gid sang imo katutom sa amon. Bendisyone ang imo katawhan. Bendisyone ang ila mga palangabuhian. Bendisyone ang mga panggas sa amon mga talamnan. Bendisyone ang ilang nga paglugayawan sa iban nga kapungsuran. Kabay makalabot sila nga walay sablag sa ila pagapadulungan. Kag ilabi na gid, bendisyone ining isla sang Negros nga amon natawhan. Kinahalad namon ang ining pag-ampo para sa imo kadayawan.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to VCon 2 and Happy New Year to everyone. Thank you for the curatorial team and our secretariat for organizing this. This is the first webinar that we have for this year, that is included in our virtual conference too, as part of the Viva XCon conference and series of webinars. Today, I would like to introduce to the head curator, Dr. Patrick Flores. Can you Dr. Patrick Flores is a professor of art studies in the art department, Department of Art Studies at the University of the Philippines, which is he chaired from 1997 to 2003, and curator of the Vargas Museum in Manila. He was one of the curators of the under construction New Dimensions in Asian Art in 2000 and the Guangzhou Biennial position papers in 2008. He was a visiting fellow at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. in 1999 and an Asian Public Intellectuals Fellow in 2004. Among his publications are Painting History, Revisions in Philippine Colonial Art, 1999, Remarkable Collection, Art, History, and the National Museum, 2006, and the Past Peripheral Curation in Southeast Asia, 2008. He was a grantee of the Asian Cultural Council in 2010 and a member of the advisory board of the exhibition of the Global Contemporary Art Worlds after 1989, organized by the Center for Art and Media in Karlsruhe and member of the Guggenheim Museum's Asian Art Council from 2011 to 2014. And he co-edited the Southeast Asian issue with Joan Key for Third Text. He convened the 2013 on behalf of the Clark Institute and the Department of Art Studies of the University of the Philippines, the conference Histories of Art History and in Southeast Asia in Manila. He was a guest scholar of the Getty Research Institute in Los Angeles in 2014. He curated an exhibition of contemporary art from Southeast Asia and Southeast Europe titled South by Southeast and the Philippine Pavilion at the Venice Biennale in 2015. He was the artistic director of the Singapore Biennial 2019. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our head curator, Patrick Flores.
So thank you, Manny, for the introduction. So this morning we are going to talk to the curators for Region 7 and Region 8. But before we do that, I'd like to briefly walk you through the main framework of Kalibutan, which is the exhibition program of the of Viva. No? I'm now going to share a slide. Uh, this has been discussed in the earlier seminars, webinars, but I'd like to repeat for context now. So the Kalibutan project, World in Mind, is incremental, protracted, and flexible. So it evolves and mutates across time from uh, uh, from now to July. No? In fact, it has started from December last year to July this year. Second, it's diverse and dynamic in terms of the materials involved, as well as the platforms through which those materials will be circulated. And finally, it's collaborative. So I am working with 6 curators from the 3 regions. So this webinar today will focus on how curators from Region 7 and Region 8 are working with their artists and also with their frameworks. So to go to the conversation proper, I'd like to introduce the first curator from Region 7. I'll stop sharing. We'd like to invite to speak J. Nathan Hore, who is an assistant professor of fine arts of the UP Cebu. teaching art history, theory and criticism, graphic and production design courses. Since 2018, he has been the curator and director of the Jose T. Hoya Gallery in UP Cebu and the coordinator of the Office for Initiatives in Culture and the Arts. He finished his BA in Fine Arts from the University of San Carlos in Cebu and worked as a publication designer for the international publishing house Author Solutions from 2011 to 2013. He completed his MA in Art Studies, Art Theory and Criticism in UP Diliman with a thesis on the life and times of the Cebuano muralist Raimundo Francia and his extant ceiling paintings in the heritage churches of Cebu and Bohol. As a curator and researcher, his interest includes Cebuano art and design history, contemporary art and design practices in Cebu, Philippine Baroque art, queer art, and issues in heritage conservation. He recently curated the retrospectives Balik Tanaw on the Cebuano cubist Celso Pipito and Lataga ug Utok on the cartoonist and illustrator Josua Cabrera at the Jose T. Hoya Gallery. So welcome, Jay. You have the floor. Hello, Jay.
Yes, hello.
Yeah.
Yes, sir, hello. I can't
Okay.
turn on the camera. Can I ask for
So
the host don't allow? Wait,
are we ready now, Jay?
there.
Okay. So welcome,
Yes, sir.
Jay. Good morning. Jay, are
Yes, good
you?
morning, sir. Good morning, Sir Pat.
Okay. So I have some questions for you. And the first one has something to do with your place in the art world, which you inhabit. And this is Cebu, of course. But I'd like to know, and the audience would like to know, your place in that world and your own practice.
Okay. Can we turn to the next slide for my presentation? Okay. So good morning, may buntag sa tanan. Ako si Jay Hore. I am currently a faculty member of the Fine Arts program of UP Cebu and I teach art history, theory, product design courses. So I also handle the curatorial works for the Jose T. Hoya Gallery. This is our university gallery in UP Cebu and the laboratory gallery for our fine arts students. We need them for curatorial work, exhibition management, and these kinds of things. And before entering the academy, I work as a communication designer. I work in the publication for international publication house Solution, and I also do visual art. And now I am more I have been doing a lot of community organizing for the arts community in Cebu with our alumni, with our students, with the diverse art groups in Cebu. And based on this experience that I have while interacting with different art groups and reflecting on the local art scene, there are some observations that I have made in Cebu. Next slide. So these observations have been very much, I have noticed that I have made this observation, especially by the time I went back to Cebu after some time, some years in Manila while I was doing my graduate studies. So I was able to kind of make this observations and assessment about how the art world functions in Cebu. So recently, Cebu has been given the distinction by UNESCO as a creative city of design. And for quite some time among the creative industries, it is regarded as the Milan of Asia, especially because of the presence of a lot of export manufacturing industries working on design, fashion accessories, home accessories, uh, and a lot of design works. And this alone would mean that in Cebu there is a prolific uh, creative practice. But this creative practice has been very much driven by design and design industries. Next slide. So reflecting on the art scene, the visual art scene, I have this to say. Cebu's art scene functions outside the gallery system. When I try to compare it to or other major cities, uh, ours in Cebu functions outside of a gallery system precisely because there is no gallery system to begin with to call like a system of galleries. There is only one uh, established gallery, commercial gallery in Cebu, and all the others are artist-run spaces or alternative spaces where artists can exhibit. And with this, uh, especially that design-oriented ang creative practice in Cebu, artists tend to be regarded in the community in the same way that you regard or you approach the work of design. So next slide. So artists thrive mainly by client commissions. There is a client-directed commissions for Cebu versus an established art scene uh, where there is a gallery system, the art buying in galleries and fairs. So uh, this is a kind of ten, uh, mode of production in Cebu. We artists do work when they are commissioned, and there is, because of the absence of galleries, there is no such thing as art buying. And then the idea of design, the user-centeredness of design, is very much important in how people deal with art in Cebu versus the artistic intention and expression, of course, because clients would hire artists to do works for them. So it's very much the patron or the client and his needs is very much influential in this commission works. As much as you hire a fashion designer to make a gown or a dress for you, you hire a furniture designer, an interior designer, an architect to design spaces and buildings for you. So in the same way, it is very much like that when a client, a person, a patron, for example, approaches an artist for a commission work. And then uh, so when you talk to fellow artists and you talk to designers and you talk to my fellow colleagues in academia, this is what we have noticed a lack and absence of the institutions of art. So perhaps with Cebu as a major, as a cosmopolitan city in the Philippines, next to Manila, it is the bigger, it's a big city. But despite prolific artistic production, there are no institutions of art aside from the academe. We don't have an art museum. We don't have galleries. And these things perhaps is what we need in Cebu to supplement the production. So instead, without these institutions that are very much important also in the circulation and in the distribution of art and in the creation of a Cebuano art world, Bhutan, uh, artists themselves do initiatives. There's a lot of artisan initiatives, artisan spaces. It is in this kind of system, an alternative system to an a gallery system, that Cebuano artists thrive locally. Okay, next slide. Yeah, I
So
think
this is
that would
that would
that's my reflection
that
of.
would cover the first question, Jay, no? Yeah. Jay, that would cover the
Yes,
first
sir.
question. So the second question has something to do, Jay, with your response to the Kalibutan, to the curatorial proposition of Kalibutan, the world in mind. So yeah, we'd like to hear your response, how as a curator you approach this framework in relation to your work in selecting the artists and also in offering discourse to contribute, no, to the deepening of the concept of kalibutan.
Yes, I personally am very happy about the position that you've given to us, Sir Pat, as the head curator. I've been reflecting on on the essays that you've sent us, especially on the idea of the everyday and the emergency. Uh, from that book, a chapter of the book Time, a Vocabulary of the Present by Ben Anderson. And you have underscored these lines: the current life world as precarious and therefore deserving of the term emergency. How everyday and the emergency, the distinction, the borders are blurred, so that with the pandemic, with COVID, the idea of the everyday becomes an idea of the emergency. The category of emergency does not, however, name only an exception that interrupts normal life, which is the everyday. And emergency is an exception, an interruption of that normal life. And the claim is that action is necessary immediately in order to meet the exception. So that word action is necessary immediately. I would like to believe that this exhibition, the Kalibutan exhibition, is a necessary action to address the merging of emergency every day, especially in the presence of the coronavirus. And this idea that you've given to us uh, serves as a background to my reflections on Kalibutan, especially because when the pandemic started, uh, we in UP, we were very much active in supporting the frontliners, in creating, especially in the Fab Lab of UP Cebu, creating PPEs, creating uh, any intervention uh, to help and to support the frontliners, especially at the beginning of the lockdowns. So my reflections, my curatorial direction that I have thought of for Kalibutan, working for Cebu artists, is around this very idea. How can art, everyday life, uh, meets emergency, and how this can be translated in art making. Okay, and next.
Yeah, and then yeah.
So my initial response to Kalibutan was to locate Kalibutan in the very city that I live, and that is Cebu City. Uh, Precisely because when the pandemic came in, Cebu City was hardly hit, and it was in the spaces of the city and the borders of the city outside the towns outside of the city became very important at this point. The borders were set up and very strict implementation of all the protocols. So the city during the pandemic became very different to me. And so I'd like to propose or to a project around this idea of the city urbanity in the time of the pandemic and how artists can interrogate these relationships. And then next. So a common expression in Cebu called by mga conductor sa jeep, sikit-sikiti, sibug-sibugi when they bring uh, when passengers get into the jeepneys. They would say sikit-sikiti, sibug-sibugi, meaning to say you compress and you expand so that others can come in, others can move out. And I'd like to expression precisely because at the pandemic and the start of the pandemic in Cebu, the jeepneys and the mode of mobility, everyday mobility, have been suspended, have been disrupted. And this idea of sikit-sikiti, sibug-sibugi captures the space in between the city, the space and created by the vacuum and the space created by the pandemic. Next. So the idea that the city is a porous entity, when the borders were created between Cebu City and the towns outside of Cebu City, because people won't come in to Cebu City because there was already numerous number of COVID cases, while the rest of the towns in Cebu wala pa. So I'd like to dwell into how people moved out immediately. Like when they declared the lockdown, people moved outside of the city, and you would be surprised how quiet and how unusual and weird to be moving around the city without people, without mobility. Uh, Next. Can we move to the next slide? So this is a picture of that day when people were moving out of the city because of the pandemic. Then next. Next slide, please. Okay. And when the cases became unmanageable, so uh, wait, unmanageable in Cebu, parang nagpadala ng intervention ng national government in the person of General Simatu to contain. And it is very funny to note that what the military, the government did was to assess the impact of COVID through a helicopter when they moved around looking from a bird's eye view perspective from the helicopter and create that assessment between communities, mga informal communities, and that were hardly hit by the pandemic. So there was this kind of surveillance going on, and a kind of looking assessment that is very much impersonal, very much distant. They won't come into the communities for fear of transmission, and they would rather assess. And this kind of looking into the conditions of the city and the pandemic is very interesting to reflect upon. Uh, when you think about kalibutan, how the world is seen, how the world is created, how the world uh, is constructed. You can either be in the world or out of the world, above the world, and create this space. Next. So the project that I'd like to work with the artists that I have selected, we would like to look into the complex, the complicated, and unique kalibutan of urban communities and informal settlements in Cebu City in the time of the pandemic, to uncover conditions, document sentiments, and recreate narratives of communities through the lens of artists, putting emphasis on art as a form of social engagement, and especially in a very precarious time as this, in a time of a pandemic. Next. So this perhaps also like to situate this in Cebuano art history. Cebuano art has been very much influenced by the Bisaya realism of the Abiliana school, which is also very much in line with the Amorsolo school. So perhaps this project can contribute to a dialogue with the Abiliana school, with how the Cebuano art for the longest time have been described as idyllic, as that serene landscape, seascapes, romantic mother and child notion, the sinulog dancer, the churches, which is very much up until the present kanang condition influence local art production. And with this reflections of kalibutan in the city, can perhaps urban realism can perhaps create a very important dialogue among artists. So I'd like to look at how this project can contribute to that direction. Okay, next.
Jay, I think we are
Okay.
moving into the third and fourth questions now. So we would like
Yes.
to know the artists that you have chosen, whom you have chosen for the exhibition Kalibutan, and their proposals for the exhibition. Can you walk us through these artists and their proposals?
Yes. And so what Kalibutan that I've mentioned earlier, I've I've tried to talk. I like to share the idea to several of my friends, several of my friend artists, and I have asked them for inputs, and I have tried to identify artists who can actually collaborate with the idea of the kalibutan. So I have chosen a collective, a very active young artist collective in Cebu, Curators. Have this conditions or uh, that I tried to use when I selected them. Artists in Cebu with an intimate familiarity with the fabric of the city, because the project dwells into assessing relationships in urban spaces. So I'd like to look to include artists who can actually who are immersed to this spaces in the city. And of course, I'd like to look into an interdisciplinary lens. So look into various varied background, and then with Cebu as a design city, this intersection of art and design practice. And so I have chosen Solitario Cinco, composed of four young artists. Next slide. So they are Sebastian Peyanes or Bastinood. Then we have John Villoria, and then Mark Anthony Cupino or Kidlat, and then Chris Emmanuel Bahadi or Bak. Next slide. Ato lang i-run through ang ilang mga profiles. So si Baste interrogates social political issues in Cebu and dwells into questions on Filipino identity. So some of those, next slide. Can we move to the next slide? Okay. And I will just show you pictures of their works. Okay, mataas na siya. And then we have John Villoria. John Villoria is an architect and a visual artist. So he multidisciplinary practice of painting, sculpture, and art installation. And then he worked, he started as a graffiti artist in Cebu and exploring Visayan culture, history, and identity. Next. Next. This is some of the works of John Villoria. So a lot of the artists, I think all of the artists in Solitario Cinco, they started working in the streets of Cebu. So they were street artists, creates graffiti and artwork on the walls of the streets in Cebu. So kaya they're more familiar with the intricacy, complex spaces of the city. Then we have Mark Anthony Cupino or Kidlat. He is a stencil artist and he co-founded Ubik Cebu, or the most active street art group in Cebu. Also, his works are to social cultural commentary, and currently most of his works focus on innocence lost and domesticated life or family life. Next. Okay. And then finally, si Chris Emmanuel Bahadi or Bak is an assemblage artist, also works as a graphic designer and art teacher. He works between figurative and abstraction, but the strength of his work lies on materiality, the of materiality, and the process to manipulate materials. And he works reflecting on life's emotions. Some of his works. Next slide. Okay, so Solitario Cinco's proposal, tentative direction for Kalibutan is to use new technology, new media technology to create a worldview of informal communities. So ideas of Google 360, the 360 cameras, using drone shots, exploring into Google Maps, and recreating these spaces. And because of the idea that they might not be able to show in an exhibitionary setup, they are looking into how they can translate uh, their work into multimedia and can be accessed via the internet. So yeah, and then the next artist for Cebu would be the next project would be Mona Alcudia's Peacock Chair. So Mona's work tries to uh, delve into the relationship of Cebu City and the world, the bigger world, through the export, manufacturing, creative industries, specifically the furniture industry of Cebu. So Mona would be recreating her thesis work from the University of Eindhoven in the Netherlands, the art school in the Netherlands. She is a colleague in the Fine Arts program of UP Cebu. She is our coordinator for product design. So this is a project that she did in the Netherlands, and then localizing the process in the Visayas. And she will restaging this for Viva. Next slide. So these are some of the photos of the work. So she collected different baskets sold in Oriental and stores, Asian stores in the Netherlands, and deconstructed and reconstructed them into a peacock chair, and just posing it with with karaoke, and the text of the karaoke that you sing along the tune, familiar famous Filipino karaoke songs, would be critical text from theorists and design theorists and historians that you would read along in the tune of sing along in the tune of famous Filipino karaoke songs. Next slide. So Mona explores the idea of Orientalism, exoticism that Western markets uh, uh, describes or attributes to the export hand-woven export industries from the Philippines. And then lastly, finally, next slide. So what you would be doing would be to recontextualize the process in the context of the Visayas, especially that unlike the Netherlands, the artisans are here, the materials are here. So she would explore and tease out how to relocate the project in the Visayas. And I think that would be all for my artists
So thank you, Jay.
for the Kalibutan, the World in Mind exhibition.
Yeah. So thank you, Jay, for that presentation. We will have we can talk further in the question and answer section of this webinar. But now we have to move on to Maria Taniguchi, who is the other curator for the region. A brief introduction on Maria. Maria was born in Dumaguete. She won the Hugo Boss Asia Art Award in 2015 and was an LUX Associate Artist in 2009. Recent exhibitions include the 12th Guangzhou Biennale, Imagine Borders, the 21st Biennale of Sydney, Superposition, Equilibrium and Engagement, and in 2018, and the History of a Vanishing Present, a prologue, The Mistake Room in Los Angeles in 2016, among others. Maria's works encompass painting, sculpture, video, and installation. Her practices investigate space and time along with social and historical contexts. Her series of untitled brick paintings is an ongoing series that had been initiated in 2008. Each painting consists of seemingly countless rectangular cells, each one outlined by hand with graphite and filled with gray and black tones. The artist has referred to her brick paintings as the fundamental root of her larger artistic practice. while the other artworks such as sculptures and installations are reflection or refractions of this practice. So welcome, Maria. Welcome to the webinar.
Hi, Patrick. Good morning. Morning, everyone.
Maayong buntag.
Mayong buntag.
So as it was with Jay, I will ask
Mhm.
you about your engagement with the Visayan art world, both as an artist and as other things besides.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, today I'm happy to say that today I have a script, so I can stick to our make the most of our time. So should we start?
Yeah. So this is the question, Maria. Mhm.
Hmm. Sorry.
Okay, you can start.
Okay. So I was born in Dumaguete and I grew up there, but I have been living and working in Manila for pretty much most of my adult life. But to answer part of this question, your question, Pat, my point of view or my perspective on the Dumaguete scene really begins with and is influenced by an art space that my mother, Kitty Taniguchi, founded in the early 90s called Maria Gallery. In Dumaguete, there's always been a need for spaces where artists can gather. And my mother's space was one of the few back then in the early 90s. So this art space was situated in our house. And here you can see a photo of the entrance, along with some works of my mother's and of course, a portrait of my mom. Um, so that this space was situated in our house or was also our home in such a way that there was almost no need to differentiate between the two. As a child, I was used to artists, writers, other visitors, and strangers interested in looking at art suddenly turning up in the house or the garden at different times of the day. Um, so, what I'm trying to say is that I wouldn't say that my relationship with the Dumaguete scene is something born out of practice because I have spent most of my time elsewhere, but I'd rather think of this place as deeply part of my cognitive map. So I'm just going to share a few photos now, um, and at this point, I also want to share a bit of the gallery's history and activities. So if we can go back to that other slide, please. Thank you. So established in November 1992, Maria Gallery has been dedicated to the promotion and advancement of art and culture in Dumaguete City. It is the coordinating and implementing body of several art programs and projects like the Dumaguete Open Biennial Terracotta Art Festival, exhibit and competition held successfully in 2005 and 2007, and the ongoing Salpong crossover, an art project that reaches out to artists and cultural workers from the different communities, as well as artists from abroad, by organizing art exhibitions, art workshops, art residencies. The gallery also acts as a conduit for events like the Nationwide Heritage Month closing ceremony in 2008 held in Dumaguete City. Okay, we can go ahead with the slide timing. Thank you. So the gallery also hosts projects from other artistic fields, such as the Philippine Writing Workshop in the 90s. It was then directed by the late national artist for literature, Dr. Edith L. Tiempo. In 1994, it supported the Visayas Islands Visual Artists Exhibition Conference, this Viva XCon in Dumaguete City. And which actually I failed to mention that I think the photo before this one was probably Charlie in Maria Gallery, Charlie Ko, who is of course one of the co-founders of Viva in the gallery back then in the 90s. Okay, so next one, please. So the gallery has in the past offered residency programs focusing on the use of terracotta to artists that show a high level of interest in the medium, with the following considerations: general artistic motivation, the artist's contemporary use of the medium, formal concerns, and discursive approach. So one of the objectives of the gallery at present is to continue to study and utilize the different clay types that can be found in the island of Negros that might be of profound relevance to the continuity of artistic traditions, forms, and impulses in the locality. Um, here we are looking at Jana Humalon, who just had recently, I think maybe last year, had an exhibition of her pottery in Maria Gallery. And this other photo is from a group exhibition called Anonymous Animals that was the most recent one. It was organized by Kitty Taniguchi. And I think the exhibition was brought to the NCCA gallery recently, maybe just a bit, maybe right before the pandemic or a few months before the pandemic. Okay. So I think part of the question now was about future plans. So I think that in terms of the future, and I mean hopefully a post-COVID future for the space, and maybe even a future with more involvement from myself and more of my presence in Dumaguete as well. Hopefully there will be a kind of continuation of how the space is described to function, in terms of its openness. But I think there will also be big and important changes as well. Some possibilities are to have a residency program for both artists and writers, at both local and from elsewhere, aiming to develop, or when people are aiming to develop or complete longer projects and maybe would benefit from staying in the space or in Dumaguete. I think we also have some improvements in the clay workshop facilities planned, and in terms of equipment and technical support and so on. Yeah. So Patrick, I hope this answers that sort of relationship with Dumaguete.
Yeah, thank you for that, Maria. The second question is focused on your response to the curatorial framework of Kalibutan. So how did that vision resonate with your assessment of the art world and its production in your locality?
Okay, I have 3 slides for this. So we're just going to spend a couple of minutes per slide. So when I first heard that we were going to use the word Kalibutan as a key term for this exhibition, I think I spent some time really struggling with the dichotomies that presented themselves as the first impression. For example, concepts that have an inside and an outside as bounded fields, such as the self versus the world at large, and other such anthropocentric conceptions of reality that are susceptible to the double bind. So Patrick, what you wrote as a curatorial prompt for us was really striking, and I was really struck by it, and I feel like I have to quote it more or less in full in order for the people here with us to follow. You said, and I quote, "The exhibition takes inspiration from the Visayan word kalibutan, which refers to both the world and consciousness. It is a dense and intricate term because it brings together world making and worldview. The world is embodied on the one hand, and the body is enworlded on the other. It is rare for a word to register simultaneously cosmos and cognition, speculation, and the universe." As for myself, can we go to the next slide? I would like to contribute to this, to the deepening of this term, this discussion. So I would like to think about the more diminutive meanings of the word kalibutan. And I have a couple of words here. The first one is inkling, which would probably imply vague notion or a slight indication, as in wala man siya kalibutan, no? Or like that she had no idea or didn't have an inkling. Um, and the second word is libut or libut, with spelled with a U, a word meaning to wonder. It's a word contained inside the word kalibutan that has many meanings as well within itself, but may mean to wander, to ramble, to go on an excursion, and is related to the keywords speculation and the universe. I think that both terms also allow us to think in much smaller scales. Um, while I think the current world preoccupation is to achieve some sense of certainty on a global scale, for example, in guarantees of the vaccine's efficacy or the number of doses available and when, I think that artists have always had the freedom to be a bit counterintuitive. So the next slide, please. So this next slide is an image of a painting by my mother, Kitty Taniguchi. This is an old painting. This might be to make a connection to the first question as well. But I also am showing this to you to enliven the keywords that we just talked about. I'm going to try and give you a story that makes sense with what I've said so far. So this painting was made in 1989, and it's an oil painting on canvas. You're looking at it here kind of the wrong side up because, well, they recently found it rolled up so that it was cleaned. So it was just somewhere in storage. And so it was cleaned, and this is actually a picture of it hanging in the garden. I didn't crop the photo to keep to one plane of orientation because I thought that this might be the most appropriate way to look at this painting, slightly disoriented. What you're looking at is a girl in the forest who looks like she's smiling while engaged in a telepathic conversation, maybe, with a seated figure in a white dress made of some kind of translucent fabric. The gauzy and veiled quality of the fabric may be indicating that she's not from around here. Behind the girl, deeper in the woods, maybe looking a little bit disinterested behind a tree, sitting there, is a somewhat scary creature from Philippine mythology, Atik Balang, as you all might know, but for the benefit of people who don't know, we're in this webinar. Atik Balang is a kind of half man, half horse hybrid. There are also two small green creatures in the grass. Not quite sure what they are. Maybe dwarves, maybe chanak. So the girl is holding blue fruit, while the fruit on the grassy floor turns from golden brown to colder tones of blue as they recede from the foreground. So I've always found this painting of my mom's remarkable because I remember that standing in front of the finished painting was an early moment of self-reflexivity. And I use the term self-reflexivity and not, for example, self-awareness or self-consciousness in a lesser degree, because through the experience of looking at myself painted into the scene at the edge of the forest, a kind of structural foreknowledge became available to me. So I think I'm talking about this because I also wanted to say that an artist's capacity to organize matter into worldview is something to think about in our consideration of kalibutan. It's kind of a short answer, Patrick. So if I have some more time, maybe I can donate it to Nomar later.
It's great answer. It's a great response, Maria.
Thank
And
you.
so we are all curious how you would flesh this out in
Hmm.
terms of your selection of the artists for Kalibutan. So that would be the third and fourth questions. Yeah.
Okay, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Hello, next slide, please. Hi, thank you. So it was a bit difficult to do the legwork for the research because as I was supposed to travel and meet up with Jay in Cebu, the COVID lockdown started. So earlier in the pandemic, the Philippines had one of the longest lockdowns in the world from March until early May. So a lot of the initial research was done online. It was my job to look at Negros Oriental and Bohol, and I think Jay and I had agreed to look at Siquijor together. But obviously that didn't happen. So luckily, I had already met with retired artist a few times since she moved to Dumaguete, and we were in touch. So it was not difficult to start a conversation about her possible participation. Gabby Nazareno, on the other hand, I have just Skyped with, and we mostly communicate Viva matters over Instagram messaging. Okay, next slide, please. So with regards to the selection of work, I'm not a curator, so I am definitely approaching this task as an artist. So I think what was important to me was work that brings us back to the present. In art making specifically, there is a challenge to materiality right now because of what's happening in the world today. And we have to deal with changes in the more philosophical aspects of apprehending an artwork, making an artwork, as well as in more practical aspects such as production and distribution. So what was interesting to me during the process of selection was work that had the potential to change in interesting ways in this new environment. Obviously, it was also important to have something interesting to offer the artist in return, whether it was in order to revisit or rethink a body of work through the internet, as in the case of retired artists, or to generate new materialities for her own work in terms of Gabby Nazareno. So at least I hope there will be some benefits like this for the artist. So next slide, please. So the first artist is Gabby Nazareno. Gabby Nazareno is an artist from Bohol. She finished her studies in mass communication in the University of the Philippines, Cebu, before going on to complete a BFA in studio arts from the University of the Philippines in Diliman, where she was awarded the 2017 Dominador Castañeda Award for Outstanding Thesis. So in 2020, she had a solo exhibition, Where Are We?, at the National Commission for Culture and Arts Gallery. Among her recent group exhibitions are Living Earth, Philippine Contemporary Art at the Pinto Space in Pinto International at the Musica Arte Cultura in Milan in 2019, Casting Stones into Still Water at Mindset Art Center in Taipei in 2018, Close Quarters at Vinyl on Vinyl Makati in 2018, Attachments at Tinao Art Gallery Makati in 2017. I believe the Mindset one, you were you curated her into that exhibition, no, Patrick?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, in 2018. Yeah.
Okay. Next slide, please. So Nazareno is concerned with erasure. Her large graphite on canvas works are fulfilled when participants rub out the drawing's details. The precision of her penciled lines is matched against the determination and muscle of erasure until shapes and lines of portraits, private rooms, and empty patios scatter, but never quite disappearing from the surface. So Nazareno's recent solo exhibition was prematurely closed by the announcement of the national lockdown. Now on display, back at her home, her recent work remains in stasis, scenes of internal life intact, to be erased by the public when public life resumes. For Viva XCon 2020, And with the attendant pandemic, she expands a series of large-scale drawings on canvas of imagined scenes of convergence. So plazas, terminals, and basketball courts. These spaces expect return. People appear to have only momentarily gone. Yet the timing of the pandemic extends dispersal into an enduring emptiness. While in wait, the audience will be asked to erase the hand-drawn images. So here we can see a few examples of her previous work, and this is graphite on canvas. She mostly makes the drawings on large canvas panels, primed. And the title is Where. And here we see, what I find really interesting about this set of drawings actually are, I don't know why, but I really like the houseplants. Because they're very particular, and I think if you know about plants, you can identify that there's a snake plant or a devil's vine somewhere there. That really speaks to kind of knowledge of interiors. Although these interiors are fictional, it's fabricated by the artist. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm just going to very briefly show you a few seconds, a minute from a couple of videos that Gabby sent me. These are current working conditions. So if we can play it. Okay, so for Viva, she's going to be working on very large drawings that might be influenced by the shape of her room. And here in this video, we see her kind of working out details of the drawing very intricately. Next slide, please. The next video, please. I think the difference between the older drawings and this new series that she's working on might be very crucially the kind of ground that she uses to draw on. Previously, as I mentioned, she's drawing on primed canvas, but this time she's working on, it's very much a work in progress, but she's started to create a new ground for the drawings with very thin, kind of gauzy, perhaps Japanese paper. Here we can see in the video, we're gluing bits of the paper together in order to form this new ground. So definitely materially, I think there will be, some changes afoot in the work, and so I think it's very exciting for me to see how this work will progress. So we're just going to watch a minute of this, and then we're going to move to the other artists. So here you can see already it's creating an interesting texture. Okay, so moving on to the next artist. The next artist is retired artist. Retired artist completed BFA in painting from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, in 1992, after which she obtained an MFA in painting from the Paris American Academy in 1994, and a summa cum laude diploma from the École des Beaux-Arts in 1996, after which she received studio grants from the city of Paris and the French Ministry of Culture. She has had numerous solo exhibitions and performances in spaces such as the Musée d'Art Moderne in Paris and the Musée Calvet in Avignon, surrounded by Water Gallery in Manila, Silver Lens Gallery in Manila, Temporary Contemporary in London. In several versions of Harana, which is her proposal, first performed in 1996 and subsequently reperformed in 13 iterations, the artist is seated before a sack of carrots that she sings to, slowly peeling and shaping each carrot into a flower until the sack is empty. Returning since her last performance in 2010, a good 10 years ago, and now based in Dumaguete City, Negros Oriental, retired artist participates in Viva XCon with Harana 14. The 13th performance, the 14th, I just said 14. The 14th performance since its iteration in 1996, the work recurs. The artists and her collaborators are seated, singing, peeling, sculpting, referencing acts of remembering and the notions of placement, sighting, apparition, gift, and offering. Performed from her home, Harana 14 will be screened at the Negros Museum in Bacolod, hopefully. Well, at least this is the ideal setting for the artist. While co-performers that she will audition from a call for participation on social media will take the sculpted offerings to various locations. So for these next slides, I'm just going to, this is something that retired artist sent to me, and I'm just going to take you through the artwork specifications. So the method is there will be an open call for participation nationwide, and after which retired artist will do an instructional workshop via a few webinars with the prospective performers. Multimedia, there will be a multimedia projection and live cast of the outcome of these meetings on the days of the Biennale. Next slide, please. So what is the action? What's going to happen? The performer, whether it's retired artist or a collaborator, engages in carrot sculpting and singing. Co-performers will take away and leave each sculpted carrot or offering, in this case, in other locations. So the performance, I think there will be a live aspect or a concurrent timed aspect with the Biennale. So it will be daily at nautical twilight until the entire sack of carrots has been peeled. And when that's not happening, there will be a projection, pre-recorded one, looped daily during the biennial hours. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, for that wonderful presentation, and also thank you, Jay. We can now have a conversation between Maria and Jay in relation to the to Region 7, no? Specifically on the particular areas covered in that region. Maria, I think you have to stop sharing. So
sorry.
Okay. So while waiting for some questions from the audience, I noticed that both of you focused on scale, no? And also materiality. But there seems to be some kind of contrast or maybe a productive tension between the two notions of scale and materiality, you know, between Jay and Maria. For Jay, it's the city is dense, no? It is dense, and there is accumulation of details, as referenced by the street art, no? And also by the performance of Mona in relation to the peacock chair, no? This like accumulation of use of the peacock chair as the design circulates globally as an export product from Cebu. And in the case of Maria, there is repetition through the performance of the retired artist, but also disappearance now because the carrots are consumed in
And in
relation
Gabby's work as well.
and Gabby's work as well. So maybe both of you can reflect on this tension between density and disappearance in relation to the region that you inhabit. It's an open question,
Yeah.
and it's my takeaway from the presentation. So
Yeah.
you please answer in whatever way you'd like to.
Okay. Jay, if I may go first.
Yeah, sure, Maria.
Okay. Well, regarding the contrast between density in my and Jay's um, um, conception of Kalibutan, I think it's very much influenced by the place, because Dumaguete is really almost the complete. No, it's not a complete opposite of Cebu, but it's hardly. It is not anywhere near the the scale of Cebu in terms of being a metropolitan center. And in fact, Dumaguete only in the last, it's only started to become busy and to get dense in terms of population and people coming into the city who don't live there. In the last, I don't know, maybe I would say 10 years or possibly less, maybe even 5 years. So it is just beginning its sprawl. Think if you observe the map of Dumaguete from the last maybe 10 years or so, you would see this kind of a creeping of the center into kind of the more kind of lush and um, um, grassy borders of the city. And you would see that there's other smaller centers, kind of like microcosms, being established as well, in your observance of this map. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. Jay, what can you say about this idea of density in relation to the practice of design, no? And also street art? Because these are the two impulses of the artists you have chosen, design and street art.
Uh, what lisod siya, no? The idea perhaps of I'll go back to the what happened to Cebu City in during the pandemic, when the seemingly dense city, very complex, very focused, and all of a sudden people left out of the city and the city became a Dumaguete, as parang there's nothing going on. And in this kind of repetition that was that people experienced when they moved out and moved their daily life in the confinement of their homes, like what Bobby has been reflecting now. And this repetition of an imagined world outside, this density outside of your home, is very, very interesting to look into with our Kalibutan. Dumaguete, the Cebu, and how we can once again bring in this experience of domestic life in lockdown life back into a vision or a hope for the normal life in a very dense urban life of the city. So this relationship perhaps of moving out, because a lot of times it's moving into the city for economic for many reasons. And what I'd like to really want to reflect with my artist is this departure from the city, which devoids the city with life, and perhaps even with that idea of export of design from Cebu, when the anonymity of craft labor, for example, how complex and dense factories are hand crafting all of this furniture, and then exported, moved outside of this messy environment, and creating a new life into the pieces of furniture in a different and a new context, is also very interesting to look into, especially reflecting on the kalibutan. So I think the density and the 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 departure from from a very dense entity, and creating these spaces, empty spaces, is a unique is kuan kanang interest kuan kanang the way we look at kalibutan in the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you.
Ana lang siguro, sir.
Okay, thank you, Jay. And maybe the last question has something to do with the kalibutan of the art, no? So the art world in Cebu and Dumaguete. Jay took note of the lack of institutions in Cebu, in spite of the fact that Cebu is the second biggest city, no, in the country. So except for the academic infrastructure, there is no gallery system to speak of. And but in the case of Maria, she started with the gallery, no, which is also their house and their home. So there seems to be no dichotomy between house and gallery in Maria's case. So my question is there really a desire for institutions in the region? Are institutions needed for the kalibutan to play out productively? How do you envision the role of institutions? Because you take note of its absence now. In the case of Jay, he takes note of the absence. So how do you envision the role of institution in a kalibutan of art that is already playing out productively without institutions?
Okay. Ipalistan man ta ni Patrick. Oy,
Muna.
lain kayo siya.
Lagi.
Well, I think, this has to do maybe, I don't know, might have to do with economies of scale, maybe. As we have to return to that. Because as you say, things are moving, things are functioning. So it has to do with scale, has to do with timing, has to do with maybe a productive use of resources, so that we don't like in a practical sense, you don't have like a giant like hunk of cement that is called an institution, but doesn't really serve the community in which it's in, or doesn't really productively, people can't really productively relate to it. It's kind of an alien presence. So these are things that I think need to be avoided.
So Maria, you're saying whatever institution is shaped now
Mm.
has to be in conversation with what is already happening. No? It's not something to be imposed on an already active ecology. No?
Yeah, I think, if people want it, I mean, I think, I'm not going to, I'm not going to be speaking for everyone, because as I said, I don't practice there, but from my observation, yes, there is a need for more spaces, obviously, to show in, to have an ideal space for the production and the exhibition of artwork. Um, but I would say that it has to be a bit more flexible, a little bit more in consideration of what the wants are, the needs, but also I think in dialogue, because sometimes I don't know. I can only speak for myself, okay, but sometimes I don't know. Sometimes artists, feel like they need something, and they might might benefit from really thinking through this, and when they might need something else, it's also kind of a dialogue with what oneself and about what one's needs are.
Okay. And Jay, the I mean design and street art, how would they fit in the desire for institutions? Because they are the street art and design seem to be thriving already. So what would be the role of the institution in relation to these energies?
So, in while talking with other artists in Cebu, uh, it is uh, they always hope to have more of the spaces, as Maria's mentioned earlier, more spaces where they can exhibit, and more spaces where they can converge together, dialogue with one another, and grow together as artists. The thing with Cebuano, young Cebuano artists now, they feel that their energy and the impulse of creating art is very high and very active, but they felt that Cebu does not support this kind of energy that they want to explore and they want to develop. So a lot of artists now move outside of Cebu, go to Manila, engage with artists in Manila, uh, collaborates with galleries in Manila, and then base their practice still in Cebu. Their production is in Cebu. They exhibit in Manila. What's kind of lost in the translation in this kind of setup is that good art, like as with design, it's not accessible to the locals because they can see it. They can't have access to these things because these are exported outside of Cebu. So if it becomes a deterrent to the cultivation of uh, artistic life of the locality, so perhaps it is in this aspect that institutions can help, but of course, not an imposition like someone coming in. It is it should be organic to the community. It should start from the community and identify the need. For example, I was very tempted not to go home to Cebu after my MA because there were a lot of opportunities in Manila. But when the idea that this is my experience in art studies, no? Kanang, at first I was very much kanang bakit walang Cebuano sa art history? Ba't walang Cebuano artist diyang nakasulat? Ba't hindi yan exclude? Something like that. But what I realized, it's like scholars in Manila can't write about Cebuano art because they are not from that place, and they are. So it should take a Cebuano art historian, for example, who can write it for them, for the community. So you can't ask institutions to do it for the local community. So at a certain would identify the need and realize that uh, it 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 should be coming from them, from one of them, to start doing, to start instituting whatever is needed for their own art, for their own kalibutan to thrive and grow and flourish.
Pat, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you, Jay and Maria, for those responses. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Although Angela Silva from Bacolod have something, I mean, some kind of advice that you'd like to check it out in the chat box now, like looking for patrons or yeah, engaging with those, I mean, maybe corporations, but of course, that's another story altogether, no? And I think Maria is in a unique position because she is also active in the Manila art scene and also outside Manila, working with different scales of institutions, no? From galleries to biennales to museums, no? And also to the art scene in relation to the art scene in Dumaguete. So I'd like to thank both of you for this important conversation. So thank you, Maria.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Jay, for the
Jay.
presentation. So this is not the last of you.
Thank you.
We will have more webinars in the next months about your artists, about their works, and so on and so forth. So this is an incremental way to produce a project during the pandemic time. No? So daghang salamat, no, Maria and Jay.
Maraming salamat. Bye.
Bye-bye. So at this point, I'd like to move to the next region, which is Region 8. And because we don't have much time, I'd like to dive into directly with the presentation of Nomar Miano, who is the curator for one of the curators for Region 8, specifically for Samar. So Nomar has taught courses in philosophy and fine arts. He finished his undergraduate degree in fine arts and the course requirements for an MA in philosophy from the University of San Carlos in Cebu. He's the former Supremo of Andres USC, a social realist cultural organization, and the founding chairperson of Regional Art Forum, an academe-based initiative that promotes contemporary art practices and art reception in the periphery. Nomar is an academic and an artist, and you can check out his full bio in the website of Viva. So please help me welcome Nomar for his presentation. So welcome, Nomar.
Thank you for the introduction, Sir Patrick.
Yeah, so Nomar, as it was with Maria and Jay, I'd like to ask you the same question, the first question, to briefly walk us through your art world.
Okay. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. I'm just showing you some of my works. Okay, just an introduction. I am a practicing artist and an art teacher or academic. I was trained as a painter, but my recent works are mostly cross-media works. It's like those examples there. Okay, we can go siguro to the next slide now. Okay. Next slide. Okay. I cannot talk about the ecology of art in summer because I am based there, and I never practiced art there actually. Okay, so we will stay in that photo. Okay. We'll discuss. I am based in Cebu and I've been practicing here in Cebu for about 60 years or so. Okay, but I come from Samar. Okay, I've never practiced art there, but except for a few occasions where I was invited to do art workshops there. I work for a certain institution, the University of San Carlos, and we know why universities, one of the reasons why we have universities, they're there to produce insights, new knowledge. In our case, they're there to provide serious critical reception for the visual arts. Okay. So aside from practicing art, like organizing exhibitions or doing exhibitions and curating, I organize and help mobilize my colleagues in our department towards certain mandates like research and publication. This is why we formed this group, Regional Forum, in 2014. So the ecology and community that I belong to occupies spheres or worlds that do not necessarily belong to the world of art, as we traditionally conceive it as a world. Okay? But that these spheres may form part of the ecology that sustains the world. Okay? However, I do see my work as a faculty as an extension or rather an integral part of my art practice. Or like what the artists before me had done, like Capro, there's boys in Cebu, we have Raymond Fernandez, for example, and many others. So that is not something new. So I am very comfortable in this world. Okay? So when we formed RAF in 2014, the idea really was to push the institution to work on its mandates, so, diba? Because we feel that there is this problem, the lack of serious critical reception for local art practices. And we also realize that our senior members are unable to pursue the mandate. So it is for us the younger faculty members to push the department towards that direction. And of course, we step on the toes of other faculty, so there are problems there. This need to, I know it speaks a lot about the situation here in the region, that it reflects weakness of local institutions. I'm referring to academic institutions, not the others. I have no problem with the other institutions, right? So I don't think I can offer a description of the local ecology of art for fear of being reductive in the process. Because I believe that we need to be self-reflexive or reflective about what we do in art in our profession as academics. Even our attempt, for example, to reform our institution should be done in a self-reflective manner. That is why I always revisit the question that I posed earlier, diba? About reception. Is there really a problem of reception, original art? In the first place, what do we mean by regional art? What do we mean by reception in the first place? What do we mean by that? Is there even such a thing as regional art, or Cebuano art, or Waray-Waray art, or authentic Visayan art? It seems to me, because there are tendencies there like nativism, and we have to watch out for it. So I mean that these questions are complicated and complex, so they also require complex answers. And to top all this, we also need to take into account other agencies, not artists, not academics, that are heavily invested also in our world. But not only us, there are also other agencies there. And these agencies are invested for other agendas, for certain agendas, which means that these agencies are, may try to reshape our future in a different direction. So we engage also these other agencies. Okay, so for me, the ecology actually of art invites response and engagement from us. It's not simply there, it is active, so we need to actively engage that world as well. So as academics and artists, it is really our job to engage and critique also the motivations of agencies, including artists. Okay. And also the city itself, how it is formed, how the world of the city is constructed, perceived, and mediated. Think about the city building that happened in the post-war Cold War period. It was that actually mimics the Marshall Plan of the United States. It was employed by the US to help European countries recover. Okay. Because this promise actually we are still facing the problems caused by this intervention after the World War II. Okay, because in my research actually, instead of the trickle effect that they promised, created backwash effects like Islamification of cities, marginalization of communities at the core of urban spaces, and we are still seeing the unfortunate effects of this, like squatter. The ones that are heavily affected by COVID are actually squatters, the informal sector. So when we talk about ecology, we need to take into account these things as well, not just us or the institution. So there is, if you look at it historically, what happened in Cebu and what is happening now, there is also a darker side in the way we organized spaces, there's a darker side to urbanism, things like that we need to engage as academics and as artists. So my point is, when we talk about ecology of art, all these things are part of the ecology. Agencies, civil society, the interface deployed by the state and international associations, organizations, and conglomerates out there, the World Bank, because they all test these things. So the point is to continue to prod on and make sense of our place in this very complex ecology.
Yeah, so no, Marte, from that assessment of the ecology, you might want to move into your response to kalibutan as a curatorial proposition. No?
Yeah. Can we go back to okay. So kalibutan. Okay, when we say kalibutan in waray-waray, if somebody asks me, haing ka man kanina, waray ka man lagi sa aton meeting. Okay, I would reply, okay, waray ak kalibutan. See, so kalibutan meaning does not necessarily refer to a material entity, an extension. Meaning it has something to do with idea or a conjecture. But all I can claim that that is something peculiar to a nuance in Waray-Waray language, but in other actual cultures we have similar takes. Like so even in Kant, Kant would refer to the world as not as a material thing, but an idea of reason. In fact, in the critical pure reason, he would refer to the world as the sum total of all appearances, okay? A systematic unity that is indispensable to reason. Because we all know as academics that Kant is actually the progenitor of constructivism. Now this is the third step. So can we go to the next slide? Hello? Wala yata.
Next slide, please. Sige, continue na lang, Nomar, without a slide.
So if the world is an idea, is a conjecture, kumbaga for Kant, our understanding of the world as an extended space is an offshoot of the idea of the world. Okay, it precedes the experiential, empirical assertion. It precedes that the idea. So the world can be conceived as a mediated world. And this is where discourses on ideology comes in, governmentality, structures, and tensions between structures and agency, they come in here. And the interface like Viva is a formal interface. These things we can talk about. So it figures out there. Can we go to the next slide? But okay, we can talk about this.
I think, Nomar, sige lang, just the slides will show up later, I think, but just continue.
Okay, so we can talk about this world, our world, as an ecology, but we can also refer to it as a life world. This is another point, and this is an important point when it comes to curating and this is the way I would approach curating. I need to mediate the ecological perspective or complex ecosystem perspective with more like hermeneutical framework, more like a mediation. So I would say that somehow we need to demythologize that. Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Nomar, part of the demythologization is the fleshing out of your curatorial response through the artists. No, so maybe you can already create this relationship between curatorial response and then the selection of the artist. Now the slides have resumed.
Okay, can you go to the next slide, please?
Yeah. Next slide, please. Yeah, next slide. This is done, no? This is finished.
Finish na. Sige pa.
Next slide.
Okay.
Next slide.
To the next slide. Okay. So tradition is very important to me, and I will go to how I apply this in the selection of the artists. Okay, I am inspired actually by what Paul Ricoeur said. Paul Ricoeur is also a philosopher. Okay? He said that human beings discover the finitude in the fact that they first find themselves in the midst of tradition. So tradition is not a bad thing here for Ricoeur. Okay, tradition is a positive expression of self-knowing. This is not Paul Ricoeur saying ako na. I'm interpreting what he's saying. So tradition for me, as per Ricoeur, tradition captures our readiness to accommodate the other. But because it enables us to recognize the finitude of our own historical circumstance. Like art making is a tradition. So we can mediate that our world with other worlds as well. This is the my entry point, a sort of bias or context that I'm using. Okay? Kumbaga, entry point is also, well, I am a practicing artist and I deploy revelations or insights that I've learned from practices of other artists as well, from institutional criticism or critics in the 70s, new genre public art, in the 90s, community art in the periphery, in 2000, things like that. We will learn from these things and we deploy, and it would be fun. Rather unfortunate if we do not deploy insights from or lessons from these practices. So my work is about my curation. The way I curate the works is really about mediation. Okay, like about mediating the inner and the outer. In our case, because this is Kalibutan, inner world and outer world. Okay, so the world of art and the other worlds uh, because art is something is a form of emancipatory practice. If you go back to enlightenment, it's nothing to do with it. Art is an institution, the promise of modernity, the promise of democracy, of a better world. Okay, but there are other emancipatory practices as well. Okay, like community works by activists, for example. Okay? Kani sila, naano sila even before Viva. So we need to mediate siguro. And in fact, in the 90s, we've been mediating na these things. Because traditions can be mediated. So we go to the next slide, please.
Next slide, please.
Sige, next. We skip
Next
that.
slide, yeah.
Okay, we will skip that na lang.
Yeah, you
No,
can.
skip that. I also already mentioned that.
Yeah, you can read the book of Nomar.
Okay, yeah, you can buy and read the book later.
Later we can plug the book, Nomar, no?
Oh,
So that
because this is mentioned there naman. Okay,
yeah.
So go to the next slide,
Next slide, please.
Okay. Sige pa.
Sige lang, next.
I mentioned this na about mediation. I mentioned this na.
I think we can go to the artists.
Okay. So one an artist that I selected for this, of course, I'm also limited because we can only choose artists from Samar. I can only choose artists from Samar related. One of the artists is Soika. Okay. The real name is Crezo Vianney Paz. Okay. And he is from Ilongos Leyte, and he is based there now. Okay. So he is also actually a practicing street artist. Can we go to the next slide? We will no longer elaborate siguro the details.
Next slide, please.
Next slide. Okay, this is an example of his work. This is in Cebu. He uses colorful, very colorful candy-like colors in his works. Okay, and he describes his work as object tunes. So he commingles objection and cartoons. So he is working on that notion, the notion of objection. This is not actually new because we know, diba? In Europe, the young British artists are known for doing this work in line with objection. So can we go to the next slide, please? Next slide, please. Okay. Objection.
Next.
Okay, this is his proposal. He is going to make this box, and you can put your head inside the box. Okay, and you will be recorded. The participants will be recorded, and the recordings will be edited and published in something that can be published in virtual spaces. So So Soika's project for Kalibutan explores, actually, in my view, my interpretation of what he's doing, it explores the intramural dimension of street art. Okay, because street art is not reducible to the actual materials today. Okay, and it's something to do with Kalibutan as a conjecture as well. Huh? So whereas street art is commonly seen as an engagement with notions of geography, this is from Bamsi. His practice is about that. Panic box engages the chaotic interior of the artist's consciousness in a way that implicates the anarchy of visual and auditory mediations in real life. There is this connection, mediation. There's no disconnect there. There is a continuous flow there. The inner world and outer Kalibutan. So there's no problem. Whereas street art is seen as a corollary extension of virtual space as a post-internet genre. Okay, Soika's Panic Box aims to be psychological and surreal, which suggests rapprochement between Breton and Baudelaire, something like that. That's this, try to mediate the past early discourses and discourses of postmodernism to come up with something, a new revelation. Because this is what I'm talking about. When we talk about art, sometimes traditions are relegated to the margins, but they're there. Okay? And for us, our job is to recover those muted traditions, recover their revelations. And by doing that, we can reveal more about what the artists are doing, what state artists are doing. So that's my take. So we go to the next project, the other group that I selected.
Next slide, please.
Next slide, please. Okay. Okay, these are my friends. Okay, some of them are co-founders of Regional Art Forum. Okay, this is a group in Cebu. Many of our members are students and also academics. Okay, our jobs, we write and we tend to publish articles about that. These are just some of the activities that we've been doing for the past several years. So we go to the next slide. Please.
Next slide, please.
Okay, we have this program actually, this community art program called Community Art Archive, in line with our mandate also as academics. We're collecting information data about community-based works, community art. So in this program, we accept proposals from cultural workers in other areas. So this proposal is actually it came from from cultural workers from Samar. And then it was discussed and negotiated yung content with our members sa RAF. We formed a RAF team for this, and then we came up with a version. The final version of the proposal is the product of this negotiation and mediations between the cultural workers from Samar and then our members. So I'd like to present the team members and the cultural workers. So we go to the next slide.
Next slide, please. Next slide.
Okay. Previous slide. Okay. So one of our team members for RAF is Ivy Mariapa. Ivy is a practicing artist and academic. Okay, she worked as an illustrator for children's literature for international publications before. She completed her bachelor degree in fine arts, major in painting, and her MA in anthropology. So she is an anthropologist. She teaches now in UP Cebu. Okay. Ivy actually is the former chairperson of the Regional Forum, and recently she is an awardee of Philippine Art Awards. So next please.
Next slide, please.
Okay. The other is Gigi Ocampo. Geraldine Ocampo is also a teacher. Okay, she teaches in University of San Carlos, and she's currently working on her thesis in MFA. Okay. She plays now. Gigi is presently Gigi is exploring assemblage. She plays with texts, found objects, and images to comment on issues about sexual violence, and misogyny, women's issues. Next, please. Next, please.
Next slide, please.
Okay, the other two, we have Mika Lindo. Mika Lindo is a visual artist, a product of some as well. He is based in Cebu. Her work revolves around personal lamentations on the impermanence of form. Okay. Mika also writes. He writes about art in local publications. So she's a good addition to our team. And then the other is Donna Medonilla. Donna is also a practicing artist based in Cebu. Her work is a self-critical engagement with materiality and form in a minimalist body. She is also a graduate of University of San Carlos painting program. We go to the cultural workers. I'd like to introduce to you this. Okay. So Santi Iliano is a cultural worker from Northern Samar. Okay. He is actually a prolific cultural worker. He is an active community organizer and facilitator for theater arts and creative writing workshops in the province. He collaborates with organizations there like Ibabao's Council, Teatro Via Hero Productions, and a number of people's organizations and associations. He is an active community organizer. Next, please. Another cultural worker from Samar is Fena Joyce Moscare. Fena is a graduate of UP Tacloban. She was an editor of UP Vista. These people are my friends from CGP, but because I am also from CGP member. Okay. She works as an advocate for resiliency program and sustainable future for developmental projects in Sama. So she's active there. The next and the other cultural worker from Samar, but he is now in Cebu. Is Eden Brillo. Okay, Eden is an active member also of CGP. He's a community organizer and cultural worker in Samar and also in, just like me before. I was also an active organizer in Samar, but then I was arrested in late prison. His cultural work covers workshops and training for writing and theater arts. So this is what I mean. I'm trying to mediate worlds. So the next slide, please. So we go to the concept. Okay. So I think they're planning to organize and document communities there in Samar, in Palapag and Mapanes. I think one community is a community of women, peasant women, and the other is a cultural group. They're going to uh, do a recording of their conversations, which recordings that can documentations, which uh, can which serve as archival documents na, and also pwede na rin for exhibition purposes. So the archive and broadcast of what we call in contemporary art conversation pieces. Yun lang. Okay.
Thank
I
you,
mean, we don't need to discuss na the other.
Yeah, maybe
We will discuss that later.
yeah, no more we can pick up some of these ideas in the question.
Yeah, I know. So we can stop there now.
Yeah, so thank you, Nomar, for that
Yeah,
presentation.
thank you very much.
We now move on to the next curator, who is Mars Briones. So Nomar, can you stop share? Okay. So Mars is a faculty member of the Division of Humanities at the UP Visayas in Tacloban College. He completed his MA in art history at the University of the Philippines, Diliman last year. His artistic and curatorial practices have developed largely through his roles in events organized by UP Tacloban. He produced the visual brands of, among other events, the 5th International Conference on Fisheries and Aquatic Sciences, and Ryan Dayan, an exhibition of paintings and sculptures which he co-curated. So in October 2020, curated Kaagi Haladawan, History and Image, an online photo exhibit of the Filipino-American War, which was part of the celebration of the 25th anniversary of the Leyte Samar Heritage Center. So he currently serves as the faculty in charge of UP Tacloban's Office of Continuing Education. Among his research interests are art history and theory, geopoetics, mythology, and cultural studies. So please help me welcome Mars Briones. So Mars, welcome.
Hi, hello everyone. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay.
My, okay. As it was in the other, with other curators, Mars, the first question has something to do with your art world. Can you walk us through that?
All right. So let's move to the next slide. So this is where Region 8 is in the Philippines, and I live in Tacloban City, so that's in a way between Leyte Island and Samar Island, as you can see in the photo. And this is where I work in UP Tacloban. I'm a faculty member in the Humanities Division of UP Tacloban. So the extent to which I understand and experience the art and culture scene in Tacloban is shaped and also limited by this positionality. My involvement in the scene has largely been as coordinator, facilitator, and curator of exhibits and events organized by UP Tacloban, particularly the Division of Humanities. So these are hubmats of our activities in school. And these events happen at certain times of the year, like the National Literature Month of April and the National Arts Month of February. And so it is in these kinds of happenings that I get to connect with artists and the local art scene. Other important times of the year around which artistic and cultural activities center are the Feast of the Santo Niño de Tacloban in June and the commemoration of Super Typhoon Yolanda in November. And in all these happenings, artists, cultural workers, institutions, and audiences, um, both in Tacloban or Region 8 and outside it, to various extents, come together and interact. Um, as it seems, this art and culture scene emerges from this particular rhythm and geography. Artistic and cultural production uh, are thematically and materially conditioned by this scheduling of events and by ideas that are made to constitute the local both as uh, a place and as a particular sensibility. I guess this is perhaps because, say, events like exhibits, spectacles, or cultural performances that correspond to this rhythm and geography are what relatively can more easily receive institutional or government support. Of course, there are also activities or like say solo and group art exhibitions that happen at certain times of the year, and then these are aspects of the local art and culture scene which I do not yet have as much access to, except as part of the audience. Although some of the artists in these cases are also the same ones whom we invite to have their works exhibited in UP Tacloban. What I look forward to in this art and culture scene is perhaps more collaboration among the different individuals and groups like visual artists, performing artists, cultural workers, researchers, activists, filmmakers, etc. Um, because I guess what this would generate is a more vibrant art and culture scene that has more synergy and one in which individual dispositions and values are negotiated. Uh, I guess this could also give everyone a sort of self-awareness individually, and I don't know, maybe also collectively as a particular art and culture scene, a self-awareness that will make that scene more conscious, more reflective about its own processes of production. Yeah.
Thank you, Mars. Second question is focused on your response as a curator for the region. How
Right.
did you respond to the curatorial prompt of Kalibutan?
So how you, Sir Patrick, how you unpack Kalibutan for Viva XCon strikes me as really engaging, because any other term for the word world would have been uh, too frustratingly too broad. But as you explained, the nuance of Kalibutan is that it points to both world and consciousness. In this perspective, the world is an ecology, a set of processes and energies, and not simply a fixed inert place or materiality. So the world does takes place. It does take place in the sense that it happens or comes around through reciprocal forces. Like you said, the world is embodied on the one hand, and the body is enworlded on the other. Therefore, my response to the curatorial vision of Kalibutan is this rethinking of the world more in terms of processes than in terms of place. Although, of course, uh, place will always be implicated in this rethinking. Next slide, please. So there's a Waray proverb um, where which announces "Ang kalibutan dalulutan." So the world is imagined not only as geographic, but in a way also choreographic. Um, this is also translated in the same book where I read the proverb. It's translated as the world is full of slippery turns. So the idea of dalunot, which in Tagalog is dulas, or or what lubricates things, what makes things slippery. Um, Indeed, while the word kalibutan may refer to surrounding and thus the consciousness of existence, of being in the world and being surrounded by it, it also refers to the motion or trajectory of turns. Kalibutan as a noun translates as, I think, turnedness or the condition of turning. In the more literal sense of the proverb, the world is reckoned as a wet surface, and this may make sense in the context of a group of islands which has had a history of violent storm surges. Um, Next slide. Oh, is it the next slide? Ah, yeah. So I
This is
guess this is the old presentation. Anyway,
okay.
so can we just go back to the previous slide? So there's a history of violent storm surges in eastern Visayas from the time of from the recent 2013 super typhoon Yolanda to way back in the time of the 17th Jesuit historian and priest and chronicler Francisco Alcina, who said that um, in Leyte and Samar, quote, tall mountains of water which form devastating waves extend the areas of the land, end of quote. Um, on an interpretive level, the proverb is a particular articulation of resonant tropes concerning fate, like, say, gulong ng palad or wheel of fortune, twist of fate, turn of events. And in most of these articulations, permanence and predictability are frustrated by the very circuitousness of circumstances. And thus, the kalibutan in this sense is never emerged, but always emergent. With regard to my assessment of the art world and its production in my locality, I think it could benefit much from more mobilities. That is to say, more circulation of ideas, objects, practices, individuals, and roles within the art and culture scene and what is thought of as outside it. As I touched on earlier, I'm looking forward to seeing more collaboration among various agencies to transform the structure that is the art world. I mean, who knows what could emerge from a collaboration between, say, a performance artist, a cartographer, and an activist. As a structure, the art and culture scene has indeed acquired particular rigidities and regularities that, although helpful in creating a sense of security and setting expectations, may be constraining. Artistic forms and practices that could otherwise emerge in a more or in a less normative environment. Oh yes, so this is what I was supposed to show you a while ago. All right, so I guess that's it for the second question.
So now we move on to the third and fourth questions, which has something to do with your process of selection, Mars, and also the proposals of the artists that whom you have chosen.
So, in my selection of Region 8 artists for Kalibutan, initially there was a perceived need to search for artists and ideas outside centers like the regional capital, which in this case is Tacloban. I remember the curatorial team gathered in Bacolod City in December 2019. So that was around 3 months before community quarantines were implemented in the country. So before the COVID-19 pandemic, part of my plan to select artists was hoping to cover as much of the region to actually travel to cities and towns in Eastern Visayas. But of course, this was to become a logistical difficulty or problem when the quarantines started limiting people's mobilities between towns and cities. My research and selection process, therefore, largely involved combing through social media and the internet, asking colleagues and forwarding the Viva XCon, PubMat, and open call to artists. And I felt like it was challenging to do it this way because I think there's something unique to the kind of rapport you get to build in a face-to-face, conversation or communication with artists. Everything just seems more direct and like spontaneous. And although this might have been a problem in this case doing it virtually, maybe it was also something advantageous to artists who felt more comfortable with corresponding online. Uh, and another problem is in searching for artists virtually, there's also the other issue you have to face, which is not all artists have had as strong an online presence as others. And thus, although obvious, it is worth noting that there hasn't been a single uniform method in researching and selecting the artists. Some of them submitted to the open call. One artist was recommended to me. Others I got to speak with either in person, through phone calls, messenger, or a combination of these. But whatever the process, one important consideration was how the artists' proposals would play out. Not anymore just on a conceptual level vis-a-vis the theme of Kalibutan, but also on a pragmatic level. Um, that is through the virtual mode by which Viva XCon has been recalibrated. And the works or proposals of the artists I'm working with, Papa Amascual and RV Sanchez, they both engage the virtual mode in ways that are beyond using the virtual as mode of circulation. These involve new media. Next slide, please. There. So these involve new media like sound art or sonic performance, as Amascual calls it, and then photos and videos. So in these works, the means of production cannot be divorced from the work's message and objectives. Sort of like what Marshall McLuhan said about how the medium is the message. So let's just slide right away into the works of the artists, right, and their profiles. Next slide.
Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
So the artists I'm working with come from separate parts of Leyte Island. Papa Amascual is from Tacloban City, which is in the northeastern part of Leyte, as you can see in this map. And RV Sanchez is from Maasin City, which is in the province of Southern Leyte, as also you can see at the southern part of the island. So next slide, Papa Amascual. There, Papa Amascual teaches in UP Tacloban, and in 2019 she completed her master's degree in theater arts at UP Diliman, where she also became part of several projects and productions, and thereby gaining experience in dramaturgy, stage management, and assistant direction. Next slide. So one of her recent productions is a reader's theater, which she directed. It was part of UP Tacloban's Paghinumbon series, which commemorated the 7th anniversary of Yolanda in November last year. So the reader's theater was based on an excerpt of Layette of Pinzon Bukoy's adaptation of William Golding's Lord of the Flies. Next slide. For the Kalibutan exhibition, Papa Muscol's project is a sound art, which she calls mediatized sonic performance. So it's an audio file to be uploaded online and made available to audiences. It is entitled Hingalo and consists of found sound and sounds of breathing, which are narrativized in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. The work also involves the participation of listeners in that they are given the choice to record their own breathing and upload it in a software. Uh, I'm looking for the slide where I I'm quoting Amasqual, not get the clip there. So as Amasqual herself explains, the target is for the audience members of Hingalo to shift in roles from being perceiver to participant as the piece makes the breathing and the performance and the breathing of the listeners in sync. In that way, listeners become performers themselves as they become more self-aware or conscious of their own breathing towards the end of the sonic performance. Uh, so the working parang it explores a sonic awareness of the world through the materialities of sound and our production, dissemination, and experience of it. Amasqual is also working on recording, among other normal breathing sounds, the breathing and coughing of COVID-19 carriers or patients. Let's go back to the slide, to the one with the audio clip. And maybe we can listen to just the first 30 seconds of this.
Wadyang pumatay sa kapwa singyo. Napatay din ng mga pulis matapos sumanong manlaban. Sa ilang estudyante, pinapanood ng polis.
So this is actually part of work in progress, which Amasqual will um, show incrementally in the next months. Now, as intimated by this clip, the work will be a blend of bodily, linguistic, and ambient sounds. And in this way, it stresses the idea of sonic stimuli as not only those which surround us and therefore outside us, but also those from within the perceiving and, in this case, ailing, suffering body. Now, in relation to the intuitions of the Paligutan exhibition, Amascol's project may explore sonic thinking or sonic imagination as ways of sensing and making sense of a viral world. I find the participatory aspect or mode of the project evocative of the idea of turning in Kalibutan the world as an intricate entanglement of processes where things take turns. The participatory mode indeed resituates the work from being the sole authorship of a Amasqual to an engagement with public such that the work becomes not a reflection or representation of an aspect of the world, but a series of mediations in a relational process where artist and audience shift roles. Um, so, next slide for RB Sanchez naman, the other artist I'm working with. Can we show the...
I think they have a problem with the slides. Please proceed without the slides. Yeah.
All right. So the other artist I'm working with, RB Sanchez, he's a visual artist from Asin, Southern Leyte, and he's actually based in Cebu City. He's been based there for the last years, recent years. He earned his Bachelor of Fine Arts at the University of San Carlos, and he has explored an array of media, including painting, photography, video installation, and performance. In 2016, his video work, Piège, was included in Pulses and Pauses, which is an international video art exchange program at Marrakesh, Morocco. So for Kalibutan, Sanchez's proposed work is entitled Figure Drawings, and it takes its cues from key concepts in basic figure drawing, namely structure and gesture. If possible, if it's possible to show the slides, you can do that. Okay, but as Sanchez explains, structure being the parts or the pieces of, in this case, the human body, and gesture demonstrating how these parts connect, relate, or um, fit together. Now, from the first increments, which are actual figure drawings, Sanchez's work will evolve into a performance which, as he says, investigates his relationship with the information and material world, and the imbalances that create abject conditions of life. So, from his proposal, he said, he's fascinated with the idea that the concept of gesture and structure can be a reflection of the balancing act that we must achieve in our lives. So each of us has to connect and relate to the world. There's a balancing act between getting what you need to be happy and giving to the community what it needs. Uh, the evolution of the work in increments, its evolution will happen in three cumulative phases, which are structure, gesture, and dissection, as he calls them. Um, the first phase, which is structure, next slide, please. The first phase structure is a photo performance where he shows the objects which he will later use in the next phases. So these are, for example, leftover food, random trash, or other sorts of objects. And he will also take photos of each part of his body and present these photos online. So these are the parts, or the structure. These photos are not exactly like part of the current proposal, but like from his previous works, which are similar to the one he's working on. So the second phase, which is gesture. Next slide. So in gesture, also a photo performance. He will show photos of his body in different poses, similar to a figure drawing model, but with the objects and uh, food stuff taped or wrapped around his body, conveying a disproportionate figure. And next slide. So that's another photo similar to the ones you will produce for the second phase. And finally, the third phase, next slide, dissection. It's a video performance. And so it's a series of recorded videos of Sanchez trying to let go of the objects from his body. And for him, this evokes the act of dismembering his own body, signifying the attempt to end the chaos between himself and the world. Maybe I can just talk more about the works, speculate on them in the Q&A. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Mars. And I'd like to bring back Nomar to the screen for the conversation. Mars, okay. Mars, Nomar, are you already in the room? So we don't have much time for this section, but I have one question for both of you. Nomar mentioned mediation. Nomar, you're here now? You can hear me? Nomar? Wala na si Nomar. Anyway, so Nomar mentioned Nomar mentioned the idea of mediation, and I think Marcy also talked about it, no? When you discussed how you curated from the position of an academic in UP, no? So I noticed from both of your presentations that there seems to be a shift from this notion of the art world in society to the social world of art. No? So for me, it's an important shift, conceptually and also curatorially, from just locating the art world in society to conceiving of the world of art as social. No? So this shift from art world in society to the social world of the social world of art is for me important. So in so that's my question is, how do you try to render, no, the social aspect of the art world as a curator? So there is in the case of Nomar, there is a drift towards like expanding it, no? Nomar, you're here already, no? Like
Yeah.
expanding it, or broadening it, or maybe even radically changing the parameters to include like activists, cultural workers, and so on and so forth. So that's the question for both of you, Nomar and Mars. How do you mediate, no, this social dimension of art, shifting from this idea of this, I think, already established idea of or formulation of the art world in society to a more, I think, interesting and more productive conceptualization of the social world of art. So how does that translate curatorially, that formulation?
Hmm.
Would like to begin, Nomar?
Oh, okay. Paano ba? Okay. Oh, well, I said kanina that there is a need to demythologize. Okay, demythologize. The reason for that because, well, if we go back to the history, when the very notion of art was somehow promulgated in the Enlightenment, because there is no notion of aesthetic autonomy, art for art's sake prior to Enlightenment. So the idea of art is really coextensive with the promise of modernity. But then the very idea or notion of modernity has changed. But before we see that some physiological problems for certain, but now it is more like I think this is more like an avenue of more social imagination. So how do we take into account the social? It's there. It's part of the. It partakes in this social imagination.
Yeah.
I might my take in that my take is that art is always involved in mediating conditions. So the social is kasi the social, how do we articulate the social? That is also a problem. But do we look at it from a scientific point of view? Is that what we mean when we talk about the social? Or we look at it from a certain life interpretation? Because there seems to be a tension there, but there seems to be a tension between, if we look at the world as a kind of ecology, as I said before, there is an parang functionalist undertone there as a system. Because it is the jargon is borrowed from that jargon, social scientific and functionalism. And this, well, if you ask me about this, is somehow like a paradoxical uh, part of how we discourse uh, life. But Kant would and Ricord actually would talk about this as a tension between freedom, and freedom, meaning freedom and nature. See, so from the point of view of nature, or Kant, in Kant's language, practical reason, we see the world as something that is caused, or something that is shaped by certain normative structures. But on the other hand, the practical reality is the world is uh, uh, one. But we can also talk about the world in terms of our personal stories and how we share these stories. So we talk about the world as a social art world as a social entity, but we can also talk about this world as a world, actually a community of people who simply loves art, and we sacrifice for this idea. Right?
Yeah, so Nomar,
So for me, the question is becoming very complex because you need to maneuver this different point of views. We see it as a social thing, a social an entity that can be articulated by social scientific framework, or we see it as something that is embedded in life. That is not discursive. And this is where also art becomes very figures out, because the things that we do as artists involves things that are not discursive. How can we talk about it in terms of social determination or something that is caused by structures or things?
yeah. I think it's a
So
very yeah. Nomar is a complex issue, and I asked that because you took the risk as a curator in Viva
yeah,
to involve the work of activists through the regional forum, and curatorially the form would be the archive or the broadcast. So I'm interested in that modality. How that sociality will be curated without just assimilating the context of the activists into this formulation of art world in society.
yeah, yes.
But anyway, we can discuss further. I'd
Yeah,
like to get the sense of Mars here, and I think I asked this Mars in relation to your risk as a curator to take in the what Nomar would say non-discursive now, potentially non-discursive aspects of like sound or performance. Na? So that kind of sociality has to be curated also quite distinctly. No? So how do you mediate those forms, sound and performance?
Um, First, I guess I might be disconnected in a while because my Wi-Fi voucher will expire, but I'll try to connect right away. So in that case, responding to that question, I think naman na ano, in an art and culture scene which where painting, sculpture, dance, and music are most popular, the works of Amascual, but also of Sanchez, are distinct. Their works also bring together various methods and art forms, and resulting in a dynamic process that engages methods that are not conventionally regarded as being in the realm of art, or a process that draws the connections between artistic categories and genres. So perhaps those hybridities will be my points of mediation. Um, we're looking at sonic materiality in multiple aspects, not only its linguistic aspect, which is more common, but like sound as uh, ambient or sound as bodily. Diba? So like there are all these layers na parang maybe the extra linguistic or extra discursive layers of sonic materiality. And these are things I'm still speculating on and wondering how to mediate in the process. Um, on the question of the art world and the social world of art, I think the art world naman is it's always already social, and it's really just the structures that make it materially separate. Diba? Like, and it really begins from a way of thinking about it, and then it translates into things that we feel materially. So if there should be a radical change or a shift in how the art world is perceived or turning it inside out, it will have to begin with rethinking it But like I said a while ago, more in the sense of circulation and collaboration, so that we don't stick to the conventional categories. We invite people and objects that are not thought of as conventionally from within the art world to interrogate it and maybe allow space for productive development. Um, in this sense, so like to make the art world more porous. And I'm also thinking about ideas of freeing, of letting go, which are palpable in the proposals of Mascual and Sanchez. And I guess the act of freeing may be a way to temper the rigidities of the art world, at least of the art world with which I'm entangled. I'm looking at how the concept of light may figure in both proposals in the works, particularly through the Visayan word buhi. I'm speculating on kinabuhi in relation to kalibutan. Because in many Visayan languages, buhi means alive, but also there's the other inflection, which is buhi, meaning to let go, to free.
Mm.
So these are things which I'm just thinking about and like speculating on how they would translate both in the production of the works and in my curatorial mediation of them.
Yeah. So thank you for that. So unfortunately, we don't have time, but this is really an interesting conversation between Nomar and Mars on the very theoretical and philosophical aspects of very practical curatorial work. No? So I think here we see that there is no necessary dichotomy between pragmatic, practical curatorial work and active thinking, no? In the philosophical and conceptual register. And I think this tendency runs across the curators, no? In this webinar, Maria and Jay, Mars, and Nomar, they all bring together the philosophical and the phenomenological aspects of curatorial work with an attentiveness to material condition, which is of course a political position. So I think with that, I am under extreme pressure to finish this webinar from the organizers. And so I'd like to thank now all the participants of the webinar, Mars, Nomar, Maria, and Jay, and of course, Manny. No? So maraming salamat and thank you all for sharing your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Mhm.
You.
I think we
Hi,
give
Sir
the
Mar.
floor
Hi, Mars.
to Manny. No?
Thank you, Patrick. I cannot turn on video. There's something wrong. Um, I would like to thank the curatorial team from Region 7 and 8, Maria, Nomar, Mars, and Jay, and Patrick for this node. I would like to invite. Would like to thank the island coordinators, for inviting other artists from the Visayas, and I would like also to thank our sponsors, the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, Mercedes Obel, Asian Cultural Council. They have been very supportive, no? The Cultural Center of the Philippines, Gallery Orange. Also, I would like to take this opportunity to invite everyone um, on our next webinar. It's about art initiatives in challenging times. It will be on January 30. It will feature initiatives during the pandemic. Art Hills, we will feature Charlie Ko and Roderick Tehing, and Precious Liano and Alex Baluyot for Art Relief Mobile Kitchen. Their initiatives were quite notable, and we would like to share this to everyone. No, that We hope to see everyone, and please do check our website vivaexcon.org and check out the schedules for the succeeding webinars. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.